700 BC, early autumn morning. A farming village in the northern part of the Attic Peninsula, ancient Greece. Thin mist blankets the rolling terraced hills. There are no grand palaces here, no orderly city-states, no mighty kings, no officials, and no written laws. For thousands of years, human communities had lived exactly like this. In groups, self-governing, without rulers, without coercion. If you were an ordinary person living here, let's call him Laos, you enjoy an absolute freedom that modern people can hardly imagine. No one dictated your working hours. No one controlled your distribution of supplies. No one restrained your words or actions. And no one taxed you, conscripted you, or enforced laws upon you. In this ancient village, all were equal and all were autonomous. It seemed like the most ideal state of existence. But here begins the most perplexing question in human history. Since ruler-free self-governance and universal freedom existed, why did all ancient civilizations, without exception, eventually choose to appoint kings, voluntarily surrendering their freedom and accepting the rule and constraints of others? The answer was never because ancient people were ignorant, nor because of powerful usurped authority, but because countless ordinary people, in the face of repeated life and death crises, made a rational choice with their own hands. Today, we follow Laos, a 19-year-old farming commoner, through a single day of immersive life to deconstruct the underlying truth behind the birth of royal power in antiquity. Dawn light filters through the thatched roof, and Laos wakes on a linen mat spread over the rammed earth floor. His home is the most ordinary kind of Greek stone and mud dwelling, low, simple, with no doors or interior partitions, containing only a hearth, a few earthenware pots, and some roughly woven baskets. Like everyone else in the village, he has spent his entire life depending on the soil of these hills and the mountain stream for survival. After washing, Laos picks up his clay jar and walks toward the stream to village entrance. It is the only water source of the whole settlement, used for irrigation, drinking, and washing alike. But in this village, where no manager of any kind exists, there are no rules for distributing the water. Those who arrive early can draw as much as they please to flood their own fields. Those who come late must make do with murky leftovers, or even find nothing at all. Without a king, there is no control over common resources. Without control, those resources are seized by the strong, the lazy, and the early birds. Laos has seen with his own eyes neighbors coming to blows over irrigation water, with no one to mediate and the matter left unsettled. Everyone possesses the freedom to fight for what they want, yet no one has a right to use resources in peace and security. This was the first insoluble dilemma that humanity encountered in the age without kings, the unregulated scramble for common goods. After a simple breakfast of barley bread and olives, Laos hoists his stone farming tools and heads for the mountain terrace fields. This farmland is owned collectively by the entire clan. The village allocates plots to each family for cultivation, but there are no clear boundary markers, nor any official confirmation of ownership. Every harvest season, numerous land disputes arise. Some secretly expand their own plot boundaries, others encroach on neighbors' cultivated areas, and some neglect their communal fields yet still demand an equal share of the collective harvest. In a system of self-governance, there is no standard for right and wrong. Interest is secured solely through contention. When disputes occur, the village's only recourse is oral mediation by the clan elders. However, the elders possess only moral authority, not coercive power. The reasonable may yield, but the unreasonable can simply ignore the mediation, leaving the dispute to escalate into confrontation, quarrels, or even brawls. Without laws, without enforcers, without a binding authority, freedom becomes the root of disorder. The diligent commoner works hard only to see his interests infringed at any moment. The opportunist takes advantage with impunity. As time goes on, the entire village's productive order crumbles step by step. At midday, the sun blazes overhead. Laos finishes the final tasks in the fields, as the early autumn grain harvest is drawing to a close. According to clan tradition, all grain produced from the cultivated land belongs to the clan collectively and is distributed uniformly to all village residents. This primitive distribution system was originally intended to promote mutual assistance and ensure average survival. Yet under an unmanaged system of self-governance, its flaws were magnified without limit. Those who toiled diligently throughout the year received exactly the same amount of grain as those who shirked their duties and reaped where they had not sown. What was worse, there were no fixed standards or supervisory mechanisms for grain distribution. Elders distributed according to their whims, favoring relatives and friends, a common sight. Hard-working villagers grew resentful, the lazy and opportunistic became ever more brazen, and the collective will produced collapse entirely. Most fatally, the village had no communal storage. All grain was distributed to individual households, each left to store its own supplies. When natural disaster struck, floods, droughts, blights. Private reserves proved insufficient to sustain life, and an entire village would be plunged into famine immediately. A rulerless, self-governing village had no collective capacity to withstand crises. In the afternoon, a sudden outcry shatters the village's calm. A neighboring nomadic tribe has once again stormed into the terrace fields, looting the ripe grain and the drying fruit. This is a crisis that this hill country village faces every single year. In the face of external raids, the flaws of a rulerless village are laid bare. There is no unified command, no collective defense, no public armed force. When the alarm sounds, the villagers act on their own. Some flee in panic to save themselves. Some rush forward alone to resist. Others stand by indifferently, unwilling to lend a hand. Everyone possesses the freedom to evade risk. Everyone has a right to protect themselves. But the ultimate outcome is that collective interests are completely undermined. The raiders plunder the crops at will and depart unopposed, leaving the entire village to lose the greater part of the year's hard labor. Afterwards, no one is held accountable. No one organizes defense. No one devises a countermeasure. Plundered this year, the same tragedy repeats the next. Absolute individual freedom buys nothing but absolute collective vulnerability. At dusk, an early autumn squall strikes without warning. Dark clouds blot out the sky, and torrential rain lashes the unprotected terrace fields and the grain left drying outdoors. In an age with public authority, there will be someone to coordinate the village's response, gathering the harvest, reinforcing field ridges, channeling floodwater, and protecting the crops. But under a rulerless system of self-governance, everyone scrambles to salvage their own belongings. The communal terraces, the collectively grown crops, no one tends to them. The downpour collapses field ridges, beats down the standing grain, and sends the harvest into rot. Collective losses mount further. The villagers stare at the devastated fields, pointing fingers, quarreling, and shifting blame. No one is willing to take responsibility. No one can coordinate a recovery. Natural disasters have never been the true terror. The terror lies in a disorderly society that has completely lost its collective ability to withstand them. Free individuals cannot defend against the risks of nature. A loose community cannot withstand the crushing force of its environment. As the rain gradually subsides, the village's small open-air market slowly comes to life. There is no currency here, no trading rules, no market supervision. All exchange relies entirely on barter. Villagers trade their grain, olives, and dried fruit for the potter's jars, the weaver's cloth, and the smith's tools from the craftsman. But unregulated trade is rife with deception and conflict. Some exchange inferior goods for large quantities of grain. Others renege on deals midway. Some simply seize goods by force. When disputes erupt, there is still no one to judge right from wrong. The parties are left to confront each other in a standoff. For ordinary people living in this age, every single day is consumed by the same exhausting struggles. Fighting over resources, mediating disputes, guarding against raids, coping with fraud, and battling natural disasters. They possess absolute freedom, yet not a shred of security. Freedom is no longer a blessing. It has become a burden of survival. Nightfall descends, and the entire village gathers on the open ground at the center of the settlement for a tribal assembly. In the span of a single day, dispute after dispute has unfolded. Conflicts over water, quarrels over land, strife over grain distribution, raids by enemies, losses from natural disaster, and clashes in the marketplace, one after another without pause. The villagers begin to reflect collectively on the rulerless, self-governing model that has persisted for millennia. In ancient times, human communities were small, resources were abundant, and external threats were few. Simple communal self-rule was entirely viable. But with population growth, resource scarcity, intensifying external competition, and more frequent natural disasters, the loose system of self-governance had become utterly inadequate to sustain the community's survival. Moral restraint, the prestige of elders, and voluntary mutual aid could maintain peace in small groups, but they could not resolve conflict of interest, fend off external dangers, or coordinate public affairs. A community without binding rules, without unified leadership, without public authority and accountability would ultimately only waste away, decline, and perish in disorder. It was at this very assembly that the villagers, for the first time, actively put forward a proposal that appended a tradition thousands of years old. We need to choose a leader, a king to govern the entire village. This was not a usurpation of power by the strong, nor oppression through violent subjugation. It was countless ordinary people, in order to survive and to live in security, voluntarily surrendering their freedom and actively choosing to be ruled. The villagers clearly defined the core duties and powers of the early king. First, to exercise unified control over public water sources and establish fair rules for distribution. Second, to demarcate land boundaries and adjudicate disputes over land and resources. Third, to coordinate the harvest and distribution of grain, and to establish public storage facilities to withstand natural disasters. Fourth, to organize collective defense of the village against raids from external tribes. Fifth, to formulate trading rules and regulate order in the marketplace. Sixth, to coordinate responses to natural disasters and organize post-disaster recovery. At this stage, the king was not an autocratic monarch lording over all from on high, but a public servant employed by the community. He had no hereditary privilege, no unlimited power. All his authority came from the collective mandate of the villagers. All his duties were directed towards solving the existential problems that ordinary people could not solve on their own. At this point, we finally grasp the ultimate truth behind the birth of ancient kingship. Humanity's decision to abandon absolute freedom and accept the rule of kings was, in essence, a trade-off for survival. In the age without kings, humans possessed absolute individual freedom. They could scramble for whatever they wanted, shirk their duties at will, evade responsibility, and refuse to contribute. But the price of this freedom was chaos over resources, endless disputes, vulnerability to natural disasters, defenselessness against enemies, and the constant threat of the community's extinction. In the age with kings, humanity ceded part of their individual freedom. They had to obey rules, fulfill obligations, submit to coordination, and contribute fairly. But in exchange, they gained stable order, fair distribution, a secure environment, the capacity to withstand crises, and the continuity and well-being of the entire community. Order is never a shackle imposed by rulers. It is a shield for ordinary people. The birth of kingship was, in essence, the inevitable path of human communities from barbaric freedom towards civilized order. Of course, this early popularly elected public king gradually became distorted in later ages. Public authority mutated into private privilege. Temporary chieftains became hereditary monarchs. The responsibility to serve the people became a tool for oppressing them. This was a corruption of power, not the original intent behind the birth of kingship. Looking across all ancient civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, Greece, China, Rome, the underlying logic behind the emergence of every single king is identical. It was never that the strong wanted to rule the weak. It was that the weak, banding together to survive, actively chose order and thus gave birth to kingship. Returning to the village in the twilight, Leo stands among the crowd, watching his fellow villagers deliberating over new rules. He finally understands that the authority, rules, order, and institutions we take for granted today did not appear out of thin air. They are the ants of civilization that our ancestors purchased through countless instances of chaos, disaster, and internal strife. The advent of the king was not a regression of civilization. It was a true beginning of human communal civilization.